Well, hello and welcome to the latest episode of what I'm going to affectionately call the Classics World Chat Show, just with few and loose women and celebrities. And this time we're talking, we're on our marks, gentlemen, because we're talking about our favourite brands, our favourite car marques, the ones that we would choose to own for the rest of our lives, basically. So roll the credits and we'll get into it. So, gents, we love cars, obviously. It's sort of given. We don't love fashion, clearly.
Territory, doesn't it?
But let's talk about the people who make them, the manufacturers, because obviously we've actually got quite a diverse taste in this channel. We cover everything from the mundane to the not multi-million, but near enough. But of course, there are those favourites that stand out. And so what we've done is we talked between us as what our favourite brands were, the ones that stand out to us, the ones that you'd wear a T-shirt of. Or what have you, that you can see yourself a fan of. So, Mr. Whedon, we'll start with the elder statesman of the group. What brands stand out to you?
Age before beauty is what you're saying, yes?
No, quite. I know we found my friends.
First of all, I must just give a big shout out to Bonhams Online, who are hosting us today, and we've had a little chance to walk around their very fabulous facility with all manner of cars. So we've been able to indulge in some of our passion for marques.
Indeed.
Today. So
and they've provided decoration. Those of you who say decoration,
yes,
there you go.
Not quite Spartan as it usually is.
It may not be the last time you hear the word Porsche in this conversation, but anyway, we'll come back to that. Exactly. But
There's
anyway,
a whale tail on the back.
So
Sorry,
I guess my challenge was actually, as ever, narrowing it down to three, because I could have probably listed a plethora of marques that I wanted to feature. But in the end, so I was trying to go for perhaps a smorgasbord that perhaps showed that variety. So first up, I'm going to go with Honda.
Okay.
But I don't actually even know much about Honda as a marque, and I was sort of reading up on them. But I just love what they stand for. Okay, I think they mark their 70th anniversary next year in 2026.
Goodness.
And I love everything they do. They're so kind of omnipresent in all things kind of transport, because they do motors for boats.
Everything from the Cub to a superboat.
Yeah,
lawnmowers.
Biggest market share in India for bikes is Honda.
The most best-selling vehicle of all time ever was the Super Cub.
Yeah. So they've just like they're so good at engineering, and then what they do it well.
Yeah.
So whether it's a bike or a powerboat or a lawnmower or a car
Or a humanoid robot.
or a humanoid robot.
Rest in peace, Asimov.
So I just think I love what they stand for. And the most bizarre thing as well is also the paradox of it all. Like, you'll get a granny spec Honda Jazz or an Ayrton Senna inspired Honda NSX or a S2000 or a Honda Accord.
Civic Type R, anything.
Yeah, all of those things. So I love the sort of the breadth of it. And it's easy to get a bit disillusioned by the more modern stuff that they've come out with. But I still love that kind of innate sort of purity of concept that Honda are always synonymous with.
So when is peak Honda for you, era-wise? So it must be a time, right?
Yeah, well, definitely that kind of... oh, hello.
Well, that didn't last.
And roll the credits again.
Continue.
We'll just keep going.
Yeah.
Peak era would probably be that kind of NSX S2000 sort of era. An ice cream van.
Oh, is it a Honda ice cream?
Yeah. When the music stops, it means they've run out of stock. But
inside as well.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Little eco spaceship pod. Oh,
But I mean, that's the point. They've invested in electric and hybrid and hydrogen. They've sort of hedged their bets in the way that some manufacturers have not. And I think that's what makes them a global success story. They were the first brand from Japan, at least, to bring out their premium version with Acura in the mid-80s.
Yes, of course.
So they say they led from Lexus and Toyota.
It's weird, that depends by territory, doesn't it? Because we never got Acura.
No,
but it's
exactly.
all over in the States.
But we got a lot of the cars, just not badged as Acura.
Yeah, exactly.
I also love their motorsport. They've always been big with touring cars, with bikes.
Bike racing, they were historically very successful in bike
Their love
racing.
affair with Formula One, just they're in and
Comes
out.
and goes.
They're in for not just.
So I think Honda for me, big ticks all round. So
Agreed.
So next up for me would be Jaguar. Shock.
No.
Who would have thunk it?
Oh, there's your shocker for the YouTube thumbnail.
Hold the front page. I don't know. I think I've always just grown up liking Jaguars. They were a sort of attainable British luxury, I suppose. I also love the underdog story of Jaguar. The sort of William Lyons battling against the establishment back in the very early days, and then even when it sort of fell into the clutches of what became British Leyland, it still managed to sort of become that sort of independent outpost. Succeeding where Triumph and sort of Rover arguably sort of failed in that big conglomerate. and the ups and downs of the company through Ford ownership and then later Tata and where we are now with Jaguar. I don't know. I'm still nervous about where Jaguar's going as a nameplate. I think it's going to be a shadow of its former self, dare I say it. But
I think quite crucially with the Tata era as well. I mean, obviously it's owned by an Indian company now, but they're still built, designed. They're all still interesting.
Still British.
And I think that's a rare thing.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and actually it's hats off to both Ford and Tata that they never tried to take that away. There was always rumours that they'd try and build cars elsewhere, but
never did.
They do build Land Rovers and stuff in the Czech Republic, I think.
Believe they do,
that kind of stuff. But yeah, Jaguar itself always stayed very much innately British, and arguably the cars that came out in that late Ford era, 2008, things like XFs and X150s, are actually some of the best cars that the company's ever made.
Yeah.
But so I've always had a hankering with Jaguars. Owned a couple in my time. Wouldn't rule out owning another one in the future.
Not at all.
So yeah, and then my third mark is probably the one I've grown up with the most, and that's Ford. Always been a Blue Oval fan.
Ford family, aren't you?
My dad had company car Fords. My mum's owned loads of Fords. I've owned Fords. I went to the Dagenham factory as a birthday treat, believe it or not. So when they were still making cars.
That must have been a day. Yeah, definitely a day.
Me and my pretend friends turned up. But it was, for me, that was magical to go around the factory and actually see the cars.
I can see that being cool, yeah.
Nowadays Ford don't make any cars in the UK.
They've just closed down the plants, haven't they?
They've still got the diesel engine plant in Dagenham, but how long has that got to go with legislation?
Well, making diesels,
all that kind of stuff, and they've got some sort of electrification centre up in Halewood, sort of the remnants of that. But I don't know. I like what Ford stood for. That kind of no nonsense. Built a car to a price, market it well. It was Fords were very rarely market leading in terms of how they drove and everything.
Controversially, they very rarely make the best car in class. No, but they market it the best.
Yes.
They had killer marketing
power,
every man cars.
And just cars built for the market, and therefore you'd be able to buy a base model Popular or a top of the range XR or gear spec. And everything else in between, and whether you were talking about a Mark III Cortina, which I know you sort of liked, so we had that project car.
Still missing.
To sort of more iconic stuff like XR3s and Capris and all that sort of stuff. I think they've always just had that knack of building cars that people want, and therefore covering everything from the family to the company cars to the proper car enthusiast that want something a bit sporty. And again, Ford's got great motorsport pedigree, and I think that's always
massive.
The only mark that seems to be holding value as of late is fast.
Yeah, that's actually true. You can surely bet on a fast
exactly.
Ford. Yeah.
In testimony to the Ford shows that we do,
quite right.
Come to the classic Ford show or Ford Fair at Silverstone. Thousands of enthusiasts
of all generations, in all ages. Yeah,
and it does, and it then generally spans the generations. They tend to be sort of fall into the two camps of the more modern stuff and the very classic stuff. But
what I think speaks volumes of Ford is, in a lot of countries, but particularly in Britain, is that even if you're not necessarily a Ford person, I'm not a Ford person, we didn't have Fords growing up, Ford has still been in your life at some point for pretty much everyone.
Yeah.
My dad had a Mondeo at one point. I love that Cortina we had. And I dare say you've had Ford, or you know of Fords, or your friends or whatever. Even if you've never owned one and you're not a Ford person, Ford has still touched your life in some way.
And permeates.
Yeah, and there's not many other brands you can say that.
And a bit like the Jaguar thing, I find myself feeling a bit sad of where Ford of Europe is at present.
EcoSport, anyone?
They make a big play that their best-selling vehicle is the Transit. That is their thing.
That's the backbone of Britain.
Yeah,
for whatever that's worth.
Built in Turkey. But I just think that it's been a slight fall from grace as Ford of Great Britain and Ford of Germany effectively became Ford of Europe, and that sort of combined enterprise built fantastic cars, but they just didn't manage to compete on the world stage. And now, what is Ford of Europe? They sell the Transit, rebodied VWs, the Ford Explorer EV as an ID4.
And the Capri EV.
It's just, I don't know, I just think Ford, as we know it here in the UK, has completely lost its identity. And that's why you don't see them in the sales charts anymore, right? So
that's true.
But I think, far from being doom and gloom, you've almost got to celebrate what happened rather than lament that it is no more. And whether you're a Ford person or not, they had their glory days of all eras. And even a non-Ford person will still find one model, at least, that resonates with them.
Well, it's interesting because last week I went up to Cumbria to see Bora Motorworks unveil their Alan Mann Racing Edition Mark 1 Escort. And it's just the first of a run of cars that they're doing in tribute with Ford, proper official licensed products from as continuation chassis numbers from Ford, and they're going to do a series of cars that pay homage to the sort of Ford of Europe back catalogue
lineage. Yeah.
So we'll see an RS spec Mark 1 Escort come out later this year, and that wouldn't be possible if they hadn't got such this fantastic back catalogue of iconic cars.
Well, the proof of the pudding, you don't see other brands doing that, do you?
No, exactly.
I'm looking forward to the Probe when they do that one.
Well, you know what? I did joke about that. I said, what cars are coming next? And they're quite tight-lipped about the cars that are coming. But I said, do a Ford Maverick one for me. That's
a Ford to be proud
that
of.
Mazda-based sort of whatever it was that they did. So, and of course they laughed, I think, and our P100 pickup or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So, but yeah, I think that's for me why Fords have sort of always resonated. Just iconic cars for everyone. So that's my top three. So,
I can appreciate that. Absolutely. Over to you, sir.
Well, mine are probably equally as predictable, to be honest. Starters, we'll go with probably the most accessible brand on my list, and that's kind of saying something actually, because it's BMW, believe it or not.
Oh, what a shock.
Yeah, I know.
Full 30 owner goes with
Who would
BMW.
have thunk it? I mean, for me, what makes a marque is firstly identity and secondly consistency.
Yeah.
And I think BMW has done that down to a T. It sort of perfected the sporting saloon with the O2 and sort of evolved that through to the 3 Series, the E21, E30, blah, just carried on. Obviously, we have the slightly larger cars. We've got the 5 Series, which are a little more long-legged, sort of an in-betweener. If you want something with an estate, then that's where you want to go.
Yep.
And then they had the 7 Series as well, which you love that E38.
I do like the 7, no denying
Joe
that.
Dawes and his E38.
Yes, thanks to our guys on Fast Car for that one.
Yes, indeed. And I think they've perfected. They've always had a sporting edge to whatever they've made.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be the sportiest, but an E38 will always be a little bit pointier than a W140 will be, et cetera, with that sort of thing as well. There's also the M cars, inexplicably just some of the greatest sports cars that have ever been, from the E30 all the way up to the F80, dare I say, and beyond that with G80, should you be so brave. But on the other end, they also have Alpina, which are quick as you like, but also will just absolutely destroy miles on the Autobahn. That's what they were made for, and there was almost no other car that will do it as well, to be honest.
Yeah. Some of the best diesel engines ever made from BMW.
Also true. I mean, latter day less so, but in the earlier stuff, it's still very good indeed. I think it's just pretty tough to go wrong until you get up to the more modern era, but cap it at about Y2K, maybe
somewhere
2005.
around there. Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions for you. I always wanted to know. So, why is it that a 5 Series wagon is typically better looking than the saloon? I would think that's always
has been, I think. Outside of maybe E39 sort of generation. I think the saloon looks better.
Yeah, I think the estate's better.
The wagons look better, I think.
Yeah.
And also, there's a phenomenon with a certain era of BMW. I'm probably going with the Bangle era, where they started out as, I think, properly minging cars. But actually,
that 7 Series is absolutely hideous.
With age, suddenly, they don't look so bad.
Do you know what? I'm glad you said that. Because when the first 1 Series came out, for years, my dad was on about such a pig ugly car, too bloated. And the other day, I saw one with an M Sport body kit on the big wheels from the factory. I'm like, that's really cool. That looks great.
I mean, that Bangle 7 Series is irredeemable for me. I don't think it will ever look good, no matter how long you give it.
But E63 6 Series?
Yeah, E63 is still...
I don't know. I'm still one of those.
Same front end, the dodgy headlights and the slots spread.
But this is still controversial now.
Yes. But the E60, great looking car.
Looks fantastic.
Great looking car. E61, even better. You're right. Other question? Or was it just the estates?
No, that was it. That was just the two things about the styling. So estates and the styling was my
yeah, I mean, consistency for them. They found their niche and they just carried on doing the same thing but better.
And do you remember the debate they had, BMW, about switching to front wheel drive? They put it off and off.
They do that.
They still flirt with it now.
Series, that's
the 1 Series and the 2 Series.
The one and the 2 Series are front wheel drive.
That's awful.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I think BMW did a survey a few years ago where they asked the general car consumer about whether rear-wheel drive was important, and of course no one even knew what they were talking about.
I think something like 80% either didn't know or didn't care.
Yeah,
I mean, to be fair, where else are you going to find a rear-wheel drive hatchback outside of the 1 Series?
That's true.
Like those
Chevette HS or a Lotus Sunbeam.
Connotations aside for a sec, an M140i is a great car.
They're awesome.
They are great little cars, and they have their connotations.
I think, like you say, that more speaks of what the modern car buying public is, because when you've got the vast majority of people buying a gelatinous Nissan Qashqai plug-in electric thing, you're never going to convince someone that 50-50 weight distribution of rear-wheel drive is a good thing, because that's not what they're interested in.
Exactly. Sort of death of the enthusiast, isn't it?
In a sad way. But it's nice to, like you say, BMW have got their, I would say, sporting rather than sporty, because you can get an ordinary, even a 318i has still got something about it that's a bit of, this is quite good.
Yeah, there's a great breadth from the individual E38 7 Series that will be the most luxurious thing with suede headlining and massaging seats, all the way up to the sportiest stripped out E30 M3. You can't really go wrong.
No, I'd agree with that. Good choice.
So BMW, then what next?
What else?
Next, little less accessible than BMW is Porsche, believe it or not. Friend. Consistency, identity.
Agreed.
911. Has it
Is there a more consistent car?
Has it really changed? I'm going to approach this from a film angle. Bear with me. There's this thing called the perfect sequel, right? Where you take what the first film did well and you do the same thing but more. Think Godfather 2, better than the first, somehow. Think Shrek 2, better than the first, somehow.
I'd agree with that.
Spider-Man 2, better than the first. How?
Yeah.
Porsche have tried to do that again and again and again and again. And that worked up until about 993, I would say.
Oh, controversial.
Well, not really. Because 996 being 996, it has its upsides, and go and watch our 993, 996 twin test if you like. But things fell off a little bit, and we start to get into the modern era. The 997 fixed it a little bit, and then we went into...
And it's turbulent, but generally what they've done is, you're quite right, you look at the 911 timeline, and all they've done is every 5 or 10 years, they take the old one, put it on a photocopier at 105%, and out it comes.
Just gets a little bit bigger, a little bit quicker.
So what's interesting here, your twin test, actually, someone did comment about the commercial success of the 996, because as you say, it's often derided because it's not the pure air-cooled experience that the 993 is, but it was a commercial.
But actually, it did very well.
When it went ballistic.
And I think, to be fair, like you say, while many purists will see it as a retrograde step, the 996, they have then
picked it back up again.
And got better.
They went down. I mean, to be honest, even still, the steering on a 996 is better than that in the 993, and I will die on that hill, to be honest. I've driven both of them.
I think the other thing is with Porsche is it's not just the 911.
No, exactly.
Even you look at something like a 944.
Let's not forget the transaxles. Those are special things
or a
too.
Boxster or a 928. Even the Cayenne, which is, if you want a big luxury SUV, it's still it's the sportiest of the big SUVs.
It's the one to have. Really.
It really is.
The first gen Cayenne is not a looker by any stretch, but it's starting to grow on me. Get a Cayenne Turbo for first gen, they're flipping rapid. And then nice things to be
and
inside.
It's still got that Porsche specialness.
They aren't necessarily, like 911s aren't necessarily the most practical cars, but in the context of their competitors, it's pretty tough to come by a car that will do everything as well as an 911
all year round, reliable,
Exactly.
And you talk about the 911, the car you buy in an emergency. The Porsche 911 and how it steadily evolved. When Mini brought out, or BMW brought out the new Mini, the R50, they referenced Porsche in all of their press.
Interesting.
Because they kept saying, everyone's comparing the old Mini with the new Mini, but imagine the Mini had evolved in the way the Porsche 911 had evolved.
Of course, yes.
And
actually, you can see that.
The R50 is the 996 of the Mini, isn't it?
What the R50 had to do is leapfrog 20 or 30 years of not developing the Mini.
Yeah, because it didn't do that. It stubbornly didn't evolve for 40 years.
Put the afterburners on the catch
Had
up.
the Isogonis original evolved from 1959, by the time you get to 2001, it probably would have turned out like the R50 in the same way that the 911. So that was one of the first few times you get a BMW executive
who knew what they were talking about.
quoting Porsche.
Lest we forget the mid-engine wonders from 914 all the way up to modern Cayman and Boxsters.
Carrera GT.
Carrera GT. Oh. Yeah, that is a halo car. Not that Porsche needed a halo car, but they got one.
Yeah.
But yeah, the mid-engine cars, arguably better dynamics than the rear engine.
Do you know what? A lot of people say that. Even today, it's kind of a perceived wisdom thing that in the real world, a Boxster or a Cayman offers you 95 or 100% of a 911 for 50 or 60% of the money.
Yeah, and you guys don't know this yet, but I've got one now. So
yes, that's maybe coming soon. But I agree with Porsche. So what's number 3 for you?
Number 3 is even less accessible. It is Aston Martin.
Okay.
Now, as unreliable as they were in the late 90s and the early 2000s,
Yes.
they still were gorgeous. I cannot deny that. And again, identity, consistency. They are the brute in a suit. They are the GT that you buy if you just want something that is relatively understated, but still you open the door and you will not want to be anywhere else.
Classy,
they are
yeah.
gorgeous inside and out, comfortable, quick, refined. They will do anything you want them to outside of a rally stage, pretty much.
Actually,
a DB7 looks beautiful standing still, which is good because that's where most
That's
of
where
most
it
of
will
them
be. To be honest, you can arguably say the same of a DB9 in our experience.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, but in all seriousness, again, I think there was a survey that Aston Martin came out as one of the coolest brands
consistently, yeah.
globally. Not even car brand; it was just one of the coolest brands in the world. So when you consider all the nameplates it's up against, Porsche, Ferrari, all this sort of things,
a lot of them, literally anyone.
to have that, and I think despite its sort of relatively recent financial woes, it's still holding its own because of their brand equity.
They've still got that allure. There's nothing, even if you disregard everyone who wants to be James Bond when they're driving one.
I was waiting for that.
They've still they've still got that kind of allure and that like understated presence in a lot of ways. I don't disagree with that. They've had some falters.
They have had some falters, but they are still trying to do the same thing. And I don't think there's anyone else that can match them as far as GT cars go.
That's probably
We've
fair.
had many companies try and fail. I mean, do you remember that the triple test that Top Gear did? Not only Top Gear, it was the Grand Tour at that point. They had a DB11 8 series, which we all know how that went. I can't remember whatever James May brought along.
And the Bentley GT.
That's it. Bentley, maybe. But again, British. No one does GTs like
it's
we do.
not an Aston Martin.
No,
and
it's
there's still a massive lure to be able to say that you drive an Aston Martin, even if it is a Signet. So,
you know what? I would have a Signet.
Do you know what I actually would have? If you have one, that's
and better still, I will have that Signet V8 that recently sold on Connected Cars. One of one. I saw that at Goodwood in 2018.
That's very cool.
Absolute weapon. But yeah, I'd say those are my three. It's a
strong choice.
Very good. So, Joe, out the rear, give us your three.
I'll start with my most predictable one because both of you have predictable. Mercedes-Benz, obviously.
Shocking.
Mercedes mega fans, I'm sure you all know. I will put a little asterisk on this one for pre-95.
You'll say that for pretty much all of them.
For pretty much all of them, yeah. Because obviously we got into the mid-90s in the dreaded Chrysler era and, biodegradable wiring looms and rusty paint and W210s and A-classes rolling over, and we won't get into that. But before then, I think what makes a good brand for me is when a brand does its own thing and is determined to be itself, in spite of any outside influence from the market or from low sales or from low profit margins. They bloody mindedly stick to doing themselves. And in the 60s, 70s and 80s, that's what Mercedes-Benz did. They weren't looking to make sporty or stylish. They weren't the best value cars. A typical Mercedes could be twice the price of a Jaguar sometimes. But they wanted the best engineered, the most complete and perfect cars.
Up to a standard?
Up to a standard.
To a cost.
Exactly. And that's what they forget. That's why a new A-class is a red McGowan underneath. They've forgotten that. But you look at things like the 123 and the R107 and even the W201, the 190, the thud you get when they shut the door and the perfect panel fitment and all the little details like the fact the lights are ribbed so they don't get covered in dirt so you can see them and all the switches fit perfectly and do what they should do.
It just makes sense.
It feels like quality. And you can sort of see that even a fairly ratty 123 or R107 has still got a feeling of the materials are well done, they're well put together, there's been real thought put into it to make the best product they can be. And there's a real satisfying, hey, a 190 isn't as sporty as an E30. And as a fun driving car, the E30 is better. But the 190 has still got this reassurance of itself and this solidity of itself. Our 124, it was a 200E with 120 odd horsepower that we bought for a couple of grand of Auto Trader. It wasn't a sports car mainly, but we sat at 100 miles an hour for hours and hours, and it sat there barely making a murmur. The wind noise was minimal. We were comfortable. We had loads of space, and it felt like we could turn around and do it all again. And it would have been absolutely, as long as I remember, to do the rad hands up.
Adoringly untrendy about a Mercedes, isn't it? Like you say, they just do their own thing.
Do you know what?
They're not trying to sort of woo kind of sort of popular. I mean, I'd say that's they do that in the modern day, but back then when they just wanted to be synonymous for making the best engineered saloon or the best engineered sort of open top,
not trying to be sporty, just
I think just they do everything well.
They do also have really good breadth.
Yeah,
don't they?
absolutely.
I mean, everything from the everyman's 190 all the way up to the obvious SEL, S-Class and G-Wagon if you want to go off-road.
Absolutely.
They're all bulletproof. It doesn't really matter what you want to do.
What I said about Mercedes, when we did our 123 versus Silver Shadow video, I know a lot of people said they were direct rivals, and you're quite right, they weren't. But they were in the same breadth for different reasons. You both could justify itself as best car in the world. And I said about the 123 in that video, it was a premium car without pretense. You know, there wasn't, you don't feel like you're looking down on people in a 123. But quietly, it's getting on with doing everything the best it can do. And that's why I own one. That's why I may well own another one. You know, they're just fantastic. And I think back when they didn't worry about profit margins, I'd be willing to bet their profit margins were particularly good back in the day. That was why the quality went so far down with the 210, is that they took one look at cars like the 190 and went, that was over-engineered. It was too good to make it viable financially, which is why we ended up with the Chrysler era stuff. But at its peak, when Mercedes wasn't worried about being sporty or making massive profits, it was just being itself and doing its own thing. I think you can't beat it.
Yeah, and a strong choice, to go on then.
Second choice.
Follow that one.
Yes, the other brand I own, perhaps slightly predictably, I'm even wearing a T-shirt of one today, is Fiat. For a very different reason. Well, for a similar reason in some ways, because Fiat has also continued to be itself in spite of outside influence, which is, at their heart, they're a mass market people's car maker. That's why they make cars like the 500 and the 126 and the Punto and so on. But even at the heart of doing something basic, bare bone, family run around, city car, whatever, it's always had that little bit of something different. You know, there's a new over 500, a classic, feels different to a Mini or a Beetle or a 2CV. It's got a bit more about. That's why it's so. It's probably the slowest of all of them and the least dynamic, but it's arguably one of the most fun because it's got that bit of Dolce Vita, for want of a better way of saying it.
Yeah.
And it's got that bit of pizzazz.
Bit of fun injected into it.
Absolutely, the Italian charm. And they do make the exotic and sporty. They make the coupe and the X19 and what have you, and they are awesome in their own right.
The Dino.
And the Dino, of course, which was a Ferrari. But even the more humble stuff, even something like a base 1.2 rental spec Punto, there's a bit of sparkle. There's a bit of something that encourages.
Je ne sais quoi.
Exactly. Well, that's French.
That's the next one.
Yeah, exactly. We'll come to that. But that's what I love about Fiat is they make very worthy, very good, some of the best small cars and family cars and what have you. Even something like the Multipla, which I know the style is controversial, but underneath
it's growing on me.
There you go, you see. Underneath the skin, there is a bit of character there, and there's a bit of something that something like an Espace or a Nissan Serena just doesn't have, and that's what I like. There's that little bit of sparkle there. That's why I've owned a couple of Fiats, and again, I'm sure I will own more. And they do the ordinary but interesting. Is what I like about Fiat.
My daughters say they should be called flat because the badge looks like it's FLAT. But
they're anything but though.
Yeah, well, no, and I think
lumpy.
I don't know. I personally don't get the whole Fiat thing. I've got to be honest. I'm sort of
obviously
miles apart with you in this one. However, I do buy the distinctive thing. I completely agree. They're a sort of a left field choice. They get an unfair rep, don't they? I think for poor reliability and things because they're no worse than many other cars.
They're worse than an Alfa.
Yeah.
They're better in a lot of ways because so for those of you that don't know, I drive a Seicento. I've got an 03 Seicento, been my first car. Full story, go and watch it on the channel. But when I tell people I drive a Fiat, the two things I get more is, I bet that's rusty. No, because by that point they didn't. They they weren't X190. Well, they didn't rust when they got wet. They were properly galvanised, properly rust-proof, and the Seicentos lasted better than the Ford Cat of the same age. A Ford Cat of the same age.
Saying much, to be fair.
Well, that's my point. A Micra or a Ford Cat of that era, you'd be picking up with a dustpan and brush by now. Whereas the Seicento is rock solid, touch wood. And they go, but it breaks down all the time. I've had mine 10 years this October. I've had one breakdown in that time, and it was a snapped clutch cable.
I remember Autocar or the modern car press testing the hot Fiat Tipo.
Oh,
late 80s.
Yes, yeah.
I remember that thing. I'd have one of those.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. A hot alternative to a XR3i or
it'd be more reliable.
I mean, it's so rare now. I mean, would you even find one for sale now?
That is still from the era where you would pick up the dustpan and brush. But if you can find a good one, it's like the X19 video on the channel. I was driving that on a rainy day in an industrial estate in Ashford, and yet still I was grinning like man having the time of my life because even at 35 mile an hour, it had that kind of something, that bit of sparkle. And that's what you need. You don't, because on a modern road, you're not going to be doing 90 mile an hour everywhere, partly because it's illegal, but also because you couldn't, because they're too rutted and they're too speed cambered and they're too narrow and crowded. So what you want is something that's fun at modest speeds that fits down little gaps. And for that, a little Fiat is hard to beat.
Okay, so Mercedes, Fiat,
and last
we've done Germany, Italy.
Yes.
Where next?
The weird one. It's France. It's Citroen, gentlemen.
Sacre bleu.
Indeed, mon Dieu. And again, this comes with a caveat of before a certain era, because a lot of people will say they were bought over PSA and became more tame. I think if you look at cars like the XM and the BX, you can disprove that a bit, because they're not exactly conventional cars. No. But you look at the really, again, when Citroen was being itself, before it was owned by PSA, it could do its own thing and have its own ideas. You've got stuff like the 2CV and the DS and the SM and the Traction and all these other completely unique cars, where if you took a badge off it, you'd still know it was a Citroen, because nothing else.
What else could it be?
Exactly. With the weird suspension that's either the hydro-pneumatic or the springs in cans, and the single spoke steering wheel, and the indicators done by rocker switches on the CX, and all this weird stuff.
Yeah, the black punk stereo.
Yeah, it's sideways in the
center. You drop all of your croissant flakes into.
Yes, and you drop your mobile phone in and so on. But the weirdness shines through, even when they try to do something relatively conventional like the Visa. Even that's got a flat twin engine and it's a bit weird. And yeah, you look at so many of their greats, the DS and the 2CV and so on, a bit like Rover, they've got this underlying engineering brilliance. You know, things like with the DS, you know, the engine is designed to go under the passengers if you're in a crash to keep you safe, and it can drive on 3 wheels, and it's got all these weird little touches about it that just so behind the crazy design and the unusual character, there's real engineering there.
I've always sensed the tension with Citroen, right, where they do all that engineering brilliance, but seldom made it profitable.
Yes.
So then they sort of claw back to commercial kind of mundanity, if you like, and then do sort of badge engineered Peugeots of late. And then every now and again they'll have a little flirtation with the idiosyncratic again, like that Citroen C3 Plurial thing, where all the panels,
the funny roof,
And the more recent one was the C4 Cactus with the big
side bits.
And was they then deleted because they sort of thought that was a little bit weird?
Like so many of the brands we talked about, I feel really bad looking at Citroen, because you can just tell that, like you say, they're almost ashamed of what they were. You know, they'll do something weird and then backpedal it or change it or facelift it out and go. It was like when the Multiple went from being the bug-eye thing to suddenly being really boring, and suddenly no one cared because it wasn't willfully different. And it's like, if you wanted normal and conventional, you'd buy a Mercedes or a BMW. You buy a Citroen because it's weird, not in spite of that.
So where does it cut off? Like Xantia?
Xantia, I feel like
Picasso egg.
Exactly, yeah.
The C6 is a bit weird.
C6 is
in
great.
a good way.
We love a C6, but I think that's an example of the weird getting through the gap, because I think that got through the filter. I don't think that would have. They won't make that today. You know, they wouldn't make that today. No. Whereas like the Xantias are perfect. We've talked about this before, where they can do conventional with just enough weird to still be cool and still be unusual. I'd love a Xantia. If you've got one, get in touch. I think you've hit the nail. The Xantia was the perfect. I mean, the ZX kind of, which is odd-ish, but
boring looking. But it's quite a nice car.
It is a very good car, but it's just not that. That for me, I'm not a Citroen purist by any means, but it doesn't quite hit the nail for me. I mean, a DS is the dream.
Well, the ZX is interesting because although it was a relatively normal-looking car, its model lineup, certainly in the UK, was quite unorthodox.
Weird, wasn't it?
Because there wasn't a natural LGL gear type equivalent. There was 4 different grades that had very distinct market segments they were going for.
I saw the other day the weirdest combination of trim, because ZX is a few and far between. It was a Vulcan, which was like the sporty one, but it was a diesel Vulcan automatic.
Yeah, I saw that one.
It was weird. Who specs that? Why would you choose that?
I want a hot hatch that does 55 to the gallon
and sounds like a tugboat. But it's also so I don't get that. But that's what I mean. Typical Citroen. Would Ford do that? No. And that's what I love about it. Even when they're being sensible, they're not. So I think for the weird days of Citroen that have gone by, because there aren't really any willfully weird manufacturers these days, certainly none that are profitable. But I think Citroen is the last bastion of that weirdness. And with occasionally cars like the Aircross and things like that, or the Cactus, a better example, the weirdness gets just enough through. So I think there's enough of Citroen surviving today that the purists would like that you could justify. But they deserve their place for me.
Okay, so we've covered 9 different marques. I want to throw something back to you both. Marques that either didn't quite make your top 3, or maybe marques that would have never made your top 3.
Okay.
So go on then.
The also rants.
Yeah.
Go on, you go first. Sir.
Oh, goodness. To be honest, daily driving with Fiat, they've never really spoken to me. I do respect all of the upsides and the sort of joie de vivre that they bring, but half of them I'm surprised you fit in them. Half of them I certainly
you don't fit a modern 500. That's for sure.
No, well, I drive a modern 500. I get in it just about, but the seat goes all the way back and wheel doesn't telescope, so I'm sort of...
Italian driving positions, though.
Yeah.
I was driving my Seicento the other day, and I have to sort of sit on the pedals. And it was, do you know, I've been driving that car 10 years, and I only just noticed the steering wheel doesn't come out of the dashboard straight. You're driving it like that.
Canted off.
Yeah. Like, it's not only is it canted off, but your hands are on the wong.
Because that
I can say that about Mark
it could be
to be fair. Yeah, potentially.
But that's what Italian driving positions. It's a quirk. It's a feature.
Yeah, exactly. For me, the quirks don't necessarily outweigh the impracticalities of them.
I get that.
And I'm sure there is love for the idiosyncrasies. That's clearly your thing with both Fiat and Citroen, Mike.
Yeah.
And yours?
Come back to me. What have you got?
So also Rans for me would have been Rover,
Naturally.
a bit like Jaguar, you know.
Underdog, yeah.
And you mentioned the thing with they always had this engineering sparkle about them, which kind of got eroded over the years, and certainly the sort of Honda Rover tie-up meant that Rover kind of lost all its identity come the 80s.
Yeah.
But, you know, I still have a lot of respect for Rover, and I can think of a number of cars in their back catalogue that I'd happily have on my driveway. So, yeah, that one, Triumph as well, another British make that I always sort of hanker after. Never owned a Triumph, wouldn't mind it. We've had TL7 on the fleet before and loved that. And a Herald, loved all of those. Cars or brands that really never enter my radar is probably American brands, to be honest with you. And it's no disrespect to them. I guess I've got perhaps a begrudging respect for Cadillac because of just it's proper America. I love the fact they're coming racing in Formula One next year. And all that.
So, and their WEC stuff as well has been awesome.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't. It's not that I don't sort of respect them as brands. It's that they've never entered my psyche for reasons I don't really sort of understand. So I would say that, and controversially, I'm sorry, Lucas, but Porsche has never really been my thing. And again, I totally get it. I totally get why they're so good. It's just that when I'm sort of writing down dream cars, like I've got a Porsche 959 model car, and as a kid I sort of thought, I wouldn't mind a 959 maybe. If I'm being picky. But it just, everyone raves about 911s, and it's not one I'd put in my top 5, I think, as a car. So
I think I do understand where you're coming from, to be fair. They can be a little bit clinical. I used to think that they all sort of sounded like hairdryers to a certain point, especially the air-cooled ones. And some of the earlier water-cooled stuff didn't really have as much personality as I would have liked it to. So I do understand that.
I think it's because some of your favourite brands are like Jaguar or Rover, where they are imperfect by their nature, whereas Porsche are perfect by their nature. So it's not quite true. What gels with
flawed genius that seems to sort of trump with me, whereas sort of something like Porsche, which just constantly sort of perfects its
whittling away.
Just honing itself every year, just doing that next generation, and it gets better and better.
I have got a brand that I wanted to mention, actually. Mazda. That was on my list originally, but I struck it off.
We talked about Mazda, didn't we?
We did mention Mazda in passing. They are engineering masters somehow. Be it through their pioneering of the wank, I say pioneering, because leave that to the R80 and such, but they are the only brand that really stuck with it, for better or for worse, with the RX-8 blowing apex seals every now and again, that sort of thing. But take something like the RX-7, that lasted, 3 generations?
4 generations, technically.
Well, but that final iteration, the FD, is iconic for a reason. It is absolutely gorgeous. I stand by that as one of the most beautiful cars of all time.
I'd agree with that,
just looking at it, and the sound is like nothing else you'll ever see. And again, they've continued that engineering even through the modern day with stuff like their early Sky Active stuff, which again, this isn't really applicable to classics world, but bringing that through to stay with combustion for as long as possible and to make something that is some of the most efficient, smooth, and reliable engines we've seen in a modern car is really,
and there's still something different. I mean, the MX-5 is as good as it's always been.
I had an MX-5, and they are brilliant. I mean, Christian von Koenigsegg, you ask him what car he would drive if he were to die tomorrow, he'd say Mark 1 MX-5. He has said that on record. Do you remember that
little sort of curvy Mazda 121 with the little stubby boot? And then it got replaced with the rebadged Ford Fiesta Mark 6 or whatever it was, a Mark 5.
Yes.
Yeah.
With sort of, it was blatantly a Fiesta, but with just sort of
Mazda badges.
badges everywhere. That's when you sort of, a little bit of you dies inside, because you think, well, they went from that to that.
Yeah. But you're right, Mazda have got, again, they're an ordinary company with a bit, in the same mold as Honda a little bit, where they've kind of, there's an undertone of sparkle there. Even
no, the same way as Fiat, to be fair.
It is, exactly. But what's quite telling is even in the modern world of SUV dross, every car journalist who comes over, they say the CX-5 is just that little bit better and that nicer. And again,
even much better looking as well.
Much better looking, and that lovely soul red paint they do.
Oh God, you took the words out of my mouth.
If you were at gunpoint and had to have a compact SUV, I would probably have a CX-5.
Oh, hands down.
I think that's the one.
How can you talk about Mazda and not have mentioned the MX-5 yet? I mean, this is...
Well, exactly.
We did briefly.
Yeah.
The MX-5 is as good as it's always been. My also-ran brand is an interesting one, Audi. So there are plenty of Audis that I like. I like the RS2. I like the early Quattro, ashes to ashes spec, and your TT. I've gone from mildly disliking them right the way up to really, really liking them in the time you've had yours. Because every time we film with it, I'm like, that looks brilliant. And so there are certain models in the A2 and the A8. There are certain Audi models that stand out to me, but I wouldn't call myself an Audi fan in a weird way. I've got a lot of respect for what they do, particularly some of the earlier stuff, but I don't, put it this way, if you were to offer me an Audi 80 or a 190e, it would be the Mercedes every time.
100%.
Well, again, they were a bit of a left field choice back in the day, but actually they went decidedly kind of, not mainstream, that's the wrong word, but just they became almost the de facto posh choice.
Yes.
You wanted to show you were a cut above the rest.
Exactly.
And that kind of, dare I say it, attracted a certain clientele.
You just stepped into Saab's shoes in a weird way.
A bit of Saab, a bit of BMW, dare I say, they sort of nicked a bit of that.
A lot of Volkswagen influence, I don't have a problem with Audi per se, apart from some of the people that drive them. Not you. But I wouldn't call myself. I wouldn't call myself an Audi fan, but I do have a bit. If you like, the other day, just yesterday, I was out and there was a guy in a first gen A8 rolled past. That's nice.
Yeah.
But equally, if that rolled past and the W140 S class had followed it, or indeed an E38, I'd have gone for either of those instead.
Yeah.
So it's not. I think it's almost like Audi is also ran throughout for me in that I always like them, but there's always something else I like more.
It's always tough to find an actual driver's car in an Audi as well, isn't it? I mean, for the engineering marvel that Quattro is, you're still going to have an understeering note.
Exactly. And for as cool as a Quattro is, an early Quattro, everyone can agree that's a cool car. But I still look at a Lancia Delta as well and go, but... And I think that's the thing with me. I like a lot of Audis, but I wouldn't. There is no one Audi that I would pick instead of everything else.
Well, if I had to have, I was actually being my de facto answer for everything for this question, one car forever to do everything, it would probably be an RS6.
Do you know? Well, it was
because it will go 5 man deep. Through snow with all their stuff and a dog in the back.
And it's an 11-second quarter mile. Exactly. No, there's a very good argument for that. So I'll tell you, why don't we throw back to you, the viewer. Comment down below your 3 favourite models, and some of your also runs as well. Justify, have you stuck? We know people who've stuck with one brand for their whole life. So is this you? Are you the person who's got 12 Citroen XMs?
I know someone on the internet with one car for their whole life.
Right, exactly. I'm practicing what I preach there. But yes, do let us know down below. What about our choices? What do you think? What are your favourite choices? Like this video, subscribe for future Classics World content. We've done videos on all the brands we've talked about, I think. So yes, do go and look on the channel. And until next time, we shall see you very soon.
See ya.